to be doing this. It is truly a labor of love and a work in progress. We're going to get to some interesting topics today, folks. But if you haven't already, definitely subscribe to my live to my live streams, but also subscribe to my Substack, openminds.substack.com, and subscribe to my podcast, Open Minds with Christopher Balkarin. That's all available anywhere you stream music, so do not be a stranger. Subscribe to everything that I put forward. Critique me, agree, disagree. Trust me, I read the comments. I'm not gonna lie, some comments they're very extreme. I've received comments, racist comments, and that's people's rights. They have every right to pursue that. I just wish there was a way that the algorithms could get a little bit better at, when someone puts forward a racist comment, for them to say, hey, like, are you sure you really want to post that kind of thing? It just kind of takes away from open minds, mentally, all those other things. But that's something actually we'll be chatting about today, about alarmism, about anxiety, about the state of our system today, and where we see ourselves going. So again, thank you to everyone who's subscribed, who's liked, who's commented, who's been part of the live streams as well. Now I'm just going to scroll because I saw Jay Ramesh, longtime viewer, had a question here. When were you first interested in live streaming? Well, Jay Ramesh, good question. I've always been interested, but I guess my own personal anxieties have held me back. The fear of judgment, the fear of, others judging me. And I've always wanted to do a show, an Open Minds live show. And I thought to myself, the best way to do this is go forward, see what happens, and try. And I think the more I do this, the more comfortable I get, and the more engaging it'll be as well, to let you all know about what I'm doing. So on TikTok, if you're watching, you'll see the agenda. We're going to talk about alarmism and anxiety. And I think that's going to be interesting. There's someone on TikTok again who's just been always spamming me, woman stan 1234, and just telling me that I'm ashamed of being Hindu. Thanks, woman stan. Appreciate that. I tell you, I don't know what it is, but my channel brings out all walks of life. And hey, I'm all for it to an extent, I guess. But that's actually a great segue into this. Sorry, Jay Ramesh says, you have said that respectfully, you were a little older. So I was curious if you had a more specific answer. So again, encouraging all of you, share the live stream, tell your friends, tell your people, tell everyone, join the Open Minds live streams. These are literally the places where we can engage in conversation that is truly good. Now, sorry, Woman Stan 1234. Woman Stan 1234 has been blasting me on TikTok for being, ashamed to be Hindu. I've muted that person, unfortunately. I hate doing that. Everyone knows I try my best to respond to all the comments, but when someone is literally spamming the comment section with that much like absurdity, you just have to sadly mute them and block them. But anyways, that is a great segue into today's topic, which is alarmism. Folks, I recently read The Myth of Mental Illness. I'm not fully complete it, but it's by Thomas Zaz, S-Z-A-S-Z. Sam Gudrell says, let's keep religion out. Keep up the good work. Thanks, Sam. Yeah, there's some people, unfortunately, you have to mute, and it's just unfortunate because I wish that people were more respectful. Sometimes people just use it as an opportunity. So the thing is, there is a book called The Myth of Mental Illness by Thomas Zaz. If you've ever heard of it, Thomas Zaz is a libertarian and truly believes in people's right to choose, their choices in life. And at a very high level, The Myth of Mental Illness talks about, and I'm going to mess this up, so please, people, Google this, but basically what I get from the book is a lot of what we think are mental illness, whether it's psychiatric episodes, etc., it's not a result of an illness per se, and how we understand an illness, like a flu or a fever, cancer diagnosis. Those are illnesses, and we treat them with medication, chemotherapy, etc. Mental illness, to Thomas Zaz, is a series of choices that people have made that can be undone by making different choices. Now, I don't mean to make it seem so matter of fact, um, but Zaz in the book talks a lot about that. Talks about um, the fact that, obesity is choices people make due to traumatic events. And in many ways, I feel like this parallels what we've seen from, um, geez, what's that book about the Holocaust survivor? Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl. Viktor Frankl, in his book Man's Search for Meaning, Frankl survived the Holocaust in a war camp, in Auschwitz. I think he survived. Frankel always said every morning he woke up and he had a choice to make. And his choice was to accept his reality and hear the screams and hear the death that he was surrounded by and be the best he could be in that scenario, or be succumbed by his environment. And in a weird way, as I'm reading Saz's work, I'm seeing a parallel between what Frankl talked about in Man's Search for Meaning and Thomas Zass's work about the myth of mental illness, which again is a very controversial topic. So I'd love to know what you think. Again, throw something in the chat. Let me know what you think. Jay Ramesh said this is very controversial when talking about mental illness and it may not being real. And, this is exactly like a good ethical argument or debate to be having. And the reason I bring all of this up is because I have seen in the past, few years almost from governments since the pandemic, there is more emphasis on mental illness, mental health programs, mental health services, etc., than ever before. And with that comes tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars in funding of programs and services, of centers, of places where people can get mental health supports. And there's a lot of articles about, the benefits of therapy, the benefits of psychiatric help, the benefits of, talk therapy, etc. But I'm reminded of Thomas Zazz's work to say, well, regardless if those supports exist or not, people still make the choice. These supports have potentially always existed. Maybe they just weren't as prominent, as public facing as they are today, but they've always been there. And perhaps the push by government is to make it more public, is to make it more ubiquitous. But ultimately, people have the choice. If you look at smoking rates, I'm going to make this comparison. So stick with me on this. But if you look at smoking rates, smoking has gone down, I believe, 1% per year since like the 80s or something like that. Like, it hasn't gone down dramatically. And this is despite billions of dollars, I would argue, that have been spent on, um, making sure that cigarettes are not advertised. Back in the 80s, I'm sure many of you remember the Du Maurier um, ads that were on race cars and were in our National Geographic books. Those don't exist anymore. So there has been a concerted effort by governments at all levels to control cigarette ads, in the fear that people will suddenly see an ad and change their behavior and buy a cigarette, etc. Well, even despite that, those coordinated campaigns, we're seeing smoking rates not go down like dramatically, despite all of this towards it. And so that gets me thinking about mental health as well. That gets me thinking about this renewed focus on mental health, or this new focus on mental health. Will people actually choose, seeing a therapist long term when it comes to their mental health? Will people choose, um, you know, going to therapy, going to like meditation, going to do hot cold therapy? Will people actually choose that, even if they were publicly funded, um, easily accessible? Will people do that? So let me know what you think in the chat. And here's a question for all of you: if mental health supports were on every street corner, they were easy, you could walk in, you could get a therapist within, let's say, 15 minutes, 10, like the most easily accessible, would you go, and would you go regularly? Let me know in the comments below. For those who are just joining, would you go, and would you go regularly to a therapist, say, if they were on every street corner, it was fully publicly funded, and there was no kind of stigma associated with it? Would you go, and would you go regularly? This very question is what I posed to people on the street when I did street videos with my videographer last summer in Toronto. Um, him and I actually worked close together on a bunch of things, but his camera died and a ton of great footage went with it, which is too bad. I haven't heard from him since. Hopefully, Calvin, if you're listening to this, I'd love to work with you again. But anyways, my the point to that is I went around and I asked people, mostly men, downtown Toronto. I asked them, would you access mental health supports if they were free and if they were everywhere? And the resounding answer is no. Most men said, yeah, no, I wouldn't do that. It's not for me. I wouldn't, even if it were free, even if we're on every street corner, no. I asked follow-up questions, and they said they were unsure whether or not therapy works. And Jay Ramesh in the comments kind of has said that it's complicated therapy. Jay Ramesh says it's not always the answer, and therapy style is not a one size fits all. And that's a fair point. It is not a one size fits all. So let's broaden this out. Let's ask again. Throw in the comments what you think about this, but forget therapy. Let's just say mental health supports, period. Whatever that looks like, whether that's therapy, meditation, hot, cold sauna, ice bath, whatever, like non-pharmaceutical interventions on mental health. So meditation classes, hot, cold, therapy. I keep thinking of those three, but like, I don't know, a safe space to read a book kind of thing, like something where it gets you focused back on yourself, taking care of your mental health and well-being yourself. Say that was on every street corner. Let's say there were mental health hubs. Every street corner they had them. It's free. You walk in, you go to the front desk, and they say, "What do you want to do?" And you tell them, there's like dozens of options for you to take care of your mental health. Would you do that? Would you actively go forward and do that? And I would argue most of us would say no. I don't know if everyone would say no. Maybe over time people would start to say yes, but most of us would probably say no. And the reason I think is because many of us, myself included sometimes, we're always looking for that very simple, quick fix to solve a broader, deeper issue inside of us. And prescription drugs really do get us there, at least on paper. They say they do. Um, we're always looking for that quick fix. So despite the interventions that governments are doing for mental health, billions of dollars, sorry, hundreds of millions of dollars, and making these programs more ubiquitous, making these, services more available, the question has to be asked is, will people choose them if they are still ubiquitous? And if people say no, that is their right, and they have every right to do that. But then we have to ask ourselves, okay, if that's their right, what do we do as a society if even still the government intervention isn't helping people? Right? That's the question I think we need to be asking ourselves, because politicians are not the people we should be asking to help us in this quest. Politicians are the people who hold the purse strings to our tax dollars and direct funding. At its basic level, that's literally what politicians are. They direct funding. Um, and 16 in the comments, hey 16, nice to see you again, says the government doesn't want to help us. They just want our money. Um, I think that's great. And Lee, yes, the topics on the screen, hopefully you can see behind me, it says philosophy, and then alarmism somewhere down there, and anxiety. So those are the topics today. Um, so I think that this is precisely why the government's concerned with taking our money. They're not in the position to tell us what to do about our mental health. So here's a question to 16 and Lee, who's just joined. Lee, nice to see you again. The question is, if mental health supports, however you define that, therapy, meditation, sauna, ice bath, spa day, whatever, was on every street corner and it were totally free, would you access those services? And if you would you access those frequently? Now, personally, I enjoy a nice sauna. I enjoy a nice ice bath. I would love that. Especially if it were free. And I knew that that it would always be like consistent. That would be great. Warren has just joined. Hey, Warren, hopefully you're doing well. Again, the question here is if mental health services were free, they were on every street corner, you choose the type of intervention you want, would you access them? Um, let's see what people are saying. Jay Ramesh says, um, this can actually be solved by doing simple things like cutting out ultra processed food, exercise, etc. Um, Great point. Definitely. Lee says people would access them frequently if it was free, but nothing is free. Great point. Great point, Lee. But like I love that. And I want you to just kind of like play with me a little bit, like entertain this thought for a second. If it were free, let's forget taxes, let's forget, how much tax dollars is being spent. But if it were free, if mental health services were free, would you access them? And would you access them regularly? Let me know in the comments below. 16 says, I would. Anything free is nice. Damn right. Anything free is nice. That's awesome. Um, so Lee says, when I think about mental health services on a serious note, it's about social services. Very interestingly, definitely expand on that. I'd love to know more about what you think about mental health as social services. Now, you might be asking folks, like, why am I asking these questions? And that's a great question. And so the reason I'm asking these questions is because of a book I'm reading, Thomas Zazz's The Myth of Mental Illness. And it's a really fascinating read. I would encourage many of you, it is quite dense, but I would encourage all of you to at least check it out. But what I find interesting is there's something to be said about how we treat illnesses. Um, and I think that, what Zaz is talking about is we're looking at our, episodes of depression, anxiety, stress, negative thoughts, as illness. And instead, perhaps what Zaz is saying is that we have a choice and we can always choose. But, of course, um, there's a lot of research on trauma and trauma informing our choices, etc. But anyways, all that to say that it lends thinking to, what I've talked about before on this live stream, which is like Elon Musk, Obama, these guys aren't fighting for freedom. They're fighting for you to vote in a very specific way. If we truly believe in freedom, how should I phrase this? If we believe in freedom, should people have the choice to refuse like mental health services if they are deemed like a mental health threat? I know I'm wording that wrong in a way, but I feel like people who are perceived threats, like who are going through psychiatric episodes, are generally prescribed drugs, put into homes where they are taken care of, etc. Um, but these are forms of repression and forms of fear and control. But if we do believe in freedom, should that person not be able to act out I don't know. It gets really challenging. Anyways, I'm gonna pause there because I've been talking for a while. And I know I probably have sparked some thoughts from yourselves. Um, Warren says they are free to the person, and multi-church groups and advocates is my community. Oh, that's mental health. Okay, great to hear, Warren. That's great to hear. Yes, Jay Ramesh says I wrote 3 different comments because of the TikTok character limit. Sorry about that, Jay Ramesh. 16 says, I think mental hospitals are really poorly run, more like jails rather than healing people. And that's interesting. And here's a question. What do we think about healing people? Warren says, sadly, mental health persons don't want help. That's a good point, Warren. Again, if we're in the true pursuit of freedom, should that person, continue to refute help, even if they tried? They just medicate, they don't counsel, 16 says. Star says, sorry, Is that 16 again? No, is it? Maybe. Sometimes they are not stable enough to realize they are not mentally well. Um, partially correct, fully agree. Interesting. I love this. People are getting into this. Thank you everyone for the comments, and thank you for getting involved in this conversation about mental health services, and would you access them if they were free or not? And what do you think of mental health institutions, psychiatric wards? Um, and are they effective? And this points back to a question I asked on Instagram today. Do you think that homeless shelters are effective at getting people off the streets permanently? And the answers so far have been no. And I think the same could be true for mental health institutions. Give me a second, folks. My thing came unplugged, and that's not good. Okay, give me a second. Give me a second. All right. So that's so Angel says no. So that's a good question for everyone. Do you think that shelters are good at getting people off the streets permanently? I personally don't think so, but I don't know enough research that shows that they're actually good. Um, 16 says most shelters kick people out after a certain number of days. Very interesting. Um, yeah, exactly. So if shelters are kicking people out, is that good? What's the point? Is it just temporary housing? Expose them to health professionals, etc., and that's it? I mean, like transitory, I guess would be the right way of saying that. Mark G. Mark, nice to see you, man. Nice to see you back on the live. Mark says, I think 90% of people use mental health as a crutch. Mental health and mental illness is different. Okay, this is a good question or statement. Mark says, again, I think 90% of people use mental health as a crutch or support. Mental health, which to Mark is a crutch, and mental illness is different. Let's talk about that, folks. Let's really get into that. And Mark, Warren, I'd love for you to talk about this, and others on the call, not just Mark and Warren, but others on the live stream. What's the difference, do you think, between mental health and mental illness? And I'm going to say, again, illness. Let's focus in on that word as well. Because if we're talking about mental illness, then naturally it means, and this is perhaps what Thomas Zaz would say, if there's an illness, that means there must be a cure. And a cure is usually like a pharmaceutical intervention, right? If we think of illness like, oh, you have a stomach illness, drink some Pepto-Bismol, you're good. You know, you'll be kind of woozy for a couple of days, but you'll be better with Pepto-Bismol, or get your electrolytes in, whatever the case is, right? Take this medicine and you'll be better. And I think that's, to Zaz's point, Thomas Zaz's point, it's like, is that the correct way of looking at this this issue? Instead, is mental illness, let's say, an episode that you're going through that is common, that is part of existence itself? And if that is common and is part of existence, then are you truly ill? Thomas Zaz mentions that back, like, prior to, like, I guess, the explosion of psychiatric, the science of psychiatry and the practice of psychiatry, there's no such thing as childhood depression. Clinically, like, diagnosed as childhood depression. Instead, like, philosophers and thinkers back in the 1800s would say, yeah, life is depressing. Because you're surrounded by things that can kill you. Women could die in birth and child rearing. You could die from the simplest of illnesses. Life expectancy was in the 40s, sometimes younger for men. Like, it was just a rough way of living. So the idea of childhood depression wasn't fully diagnosed because life itself was replete with suffering. And this harkens back to like ancient thought, like Greek thinking, like even like ancient philosophical Hindu thinking, Indian, like the ancient scriptures in the Upanishads and the Bhagavad Gita, which talk about this particularly, that says life is rife with suffering, but you have something inside you that can withstand that suffering, rise above it, and make your life meaningful and filled with energy and vivation, and not be overwhelmed by the waves of life. And there's like this old teaching in the Upanishads. It's like the person who's like, not moved by great news. You get like, great bonus at work. You get, the girl of your dreams says yes, like, and you're not at all, brought down by bad news, crushing news. You get fired from your job, your wife leaves you, you lost a lot of money, etc. Like, there's something to be said about that. And then if that's the ideal state and we all make choices, what then becomes of depression? What then becomes of anxiety? What then becomes of these psychiatric states? If we can make choices like get to an equilibrium, if that is possible, and if we all agree that's possible, is in fact the reality of depression and anxiety a state of our choice, not necessarily a state of our mental health. I'm going to pause there. I know I gave you a lot to think about, but let me know what you think in the comments. I'm going to try to get caught up on them here. Lane McKay says, Jesus loves you. Thanks, Lane. um, Warren says, a lot of mental health is usually self-induced. No coping skills with stress, etc. Very interesting comment, Warren. Let me know what you think online. If you haven't already, let me know what you think about that comment. Mark G says, not every illness has a cure. Doctors tell me I'm depressed, or I should be because of my disability. Interesting, Mark. Mental health by Jay Ramesh says, is real, but it's very hard to actually measure quantitatively. This is what makes it so complicated. Good point, Jay Ramesh. Mark G says, my situation is depressing, but I'm not depressed. Every doc wanted me to take antidepressants. Why? Very interesting. Now, Mark says earlier, doctors tell me I'm depressed, or I should be because of my disability. And then he goes on to say, my situation is depressing. Sorry, my situation maybe isn't depressing. Sorry, my situation is depressing, but I'm not depressed. Every doc wants me to take antidepressants, but why? Very good question. Warren says, illness, EDC, bipolar. I think that's a continuation, Warren, of your earlier comment. Here we go. A lot of mental health is usually self-induced, no coping mechanisms for stress, etc. Okay. Angel, hey Angel, thanks for subscribing. Thanks for being here. Says Canada needs to follow the Scandinavian country, giving housing to people in need of permanent invest house. Okay, Angel, I'd love for you to expand on that. Might be from an earlier conversation we had on housing. Warren says youth today have been protected growing up. Anxiety is huge today for our youth. I couldn't agree more, Warren. I have seen and experienced that firsthand. Compared to when I was growing up, the things that were said on the playground, especially being the only brown kid, I didn't even think about it. It just rolls off my back. And today it's like you can't even mention that anymore. And these kids today are growing up in a very, very sensitive environment, which is yet to be seen if that's good or bad for their resilience in life. Because let me tell you, they're going to meet some people who are not like the kids in their school playground. That's for sure. So, folks, again, thanks again for subscribing, liking, sharing, telling everybody about this. This is my passion, Open Minds. Subscribe to me, Instagram at Open Minds Pod, on my Substack, openminds.substack.com. And subscribe to my podcast, the Open Minds Podcast with Christopher Balkrin. You can find that anywhere you stream music. And I would really appreciate any feedback, research, anything you'd like to say, good, bad, indifferent. I'm all here for it. And the reason I want to do all of this is because I truly do believe this is the place where we can build better public policy. Our public policy today is so politically motivated. It's so politically motivated by those on the left, those on the right, and those in the middle are left wondering what the hell is going on. And so that's my pitch. Definitely subscribe if you haven't. Jamie baby, I love you, says Christopher's so fine. Petition to have you on our TV screens, aka Love is Blind. Jamie, baby, you're not the first person to tell me that. Love is Blind apparently is coming to Toronto, although I don't think I could put myself in a position to be on national TV on Netflix as a Love is Blind contestant. Although that is hilarious. If you know anyone, let me know who's a producer of the show, and maybe I'll give them a call and say, hey, what are the chances? But before I get on Love is Blind, JB, I need my own open mind show on like TVs and on, CBC and CTV or like a radio show or something. Because that's the passion. Open minds. Maybe Love is Blind is my passion. Who knows? Please be the hot South Asian rep we need. I don't know if I'm that hot South Asian rep, especially when people get to know my personal viewpoints. They'll be like, that's why, folks, I'll go in my closet. I made a shirt for my podcast called Sleeper Diversity Hire. Sleeper Diversity Hire, right? Like, it's great. He checks the box. He's brown. And then they get to know me and they're like, uh-oh, this guy, something's wrong. It's totally going off the rails. I am totally the sleeper diversity hire. On the surface, I check the box. Then you get to know me. You're like, what the hell? This guy definitely should not be in this position. But anyways, okay. Back to, enough fun, folks. Back to these perspectives on mental health and well-being. Mark, thanks so much for sharing your perspectives and your personal story of, being disabled and your situation being depressing. But Mark himself is not depressed. And Mark, I mean, I don't want to put any pressure on you, but if you'd love to join the live stream to talk about that more, just let me know. I think you can actually put yourself forward because I think more people need to hear from that. Warren says, the brown dude that broke the mold. That's right, Warren. That's me, man. Maybe that's why CBC is like avoiding me. I have reached out endless times to CBC to get on their show, but they just don't say, they don't ever reply to me. That's fine. That's okay. So the question here is, again, mental illness. We have overprescribed our population. Folks, I'm going to share a very personal story about my own experience with anxiety. Years ago during the pandemic, everything was locked down and I didn't see like family and friends for months, like most people. And I remember the first time I saw my family after must have been like 6 or 7 months. And I had an anxiety attack driving on the highway. First time I ever had it. And I was prescribed Ativan. Ativan is a very strong methamphetamine. When you actually do your research on the drugs, like you're prescribed, it's kind of scary. And I'll tell you, the racing thoughts are real. They're a result of a lot of things, but the racing thoughts are real. And I would say that Ativan was scary. It instantly calmed me down. Yes. I was able to just like go to bed, sleep, have no issues. But then the next morning I woke up and man, those thoughts were crazy. Like couldn't drive, got so much anxiety at a stop sign, got so much anxiety, like just doing day-to-day things. And I think that's a direct result of the methamphetamine that I was on. And so I stopped taking it after like a day and a half. And the next day I woke up and I remember vividly, I was walking home from the GO train stop and like it was so scary because I saw trains go by, and I had these thoughts of like, fuck this is over. Like you can end it right now. And this is scary to actually admit on a live stream, but it was like, yeah, I would argue that it was suicidal ideation. That was a result directly of methamphetamines. And so I had another anxiety attack not too much longer after that. And I went to Emerge and I told them I documented everything. And the doctor, I'll never forget this. This was like years ago. He said, listen, man, I can prescribe you right now I can prescribe you Xanax right now. I can write you a prescription and you'll have it like within the next 10 minutes. But I want you to know that Xanax is very, very dangerous. It's a very dangerous drug, and you may get very addictive. Warren says seclusion is not health. 100% agree with you, Warren. Um, and he said, I would strongly encourage you to look into. I did wait, Ralph, 10 hours. I did definitely wait 10 hours. Um, and he said, I strongly encourage you to look at other methods of, your mental health, meditation, exercise, et cetera, et cetera. And that really did spark like this doubling down on meditation, on physical health, on going to the sauna, ice bath, all those things. I found what worked for me. I'm not saying it works for everybody, but it worked for me. And man, it's been years. I've never had anxiety. I've never had anxiety attacks. I mean, I have like sometimes anxiety, but nothing like what it was. And I attribute none of it to the pharmaceutical interventions and all of it to that one doctor who said, hey, man, think outside the box. Don't think that I'm going to prescribe you something and you're going to just be instantly saved. That's the wrong way of looking at it. And, I'm sure that doctor probably stood to make money off his prescription for me for Xanax. And here he was saying, I would rather not prescribe you something. I would rather you explore other options outside of that. And so I'm telling you, man, it was just so interesting. That simple, like 10-minute conversation with this Emerge doctor, because he ran all these tests, heart rates, all that stuff. And he said, nothing's wrong with you. It's crazy what anxiety can do. It makes you feel like you're going to die. Chest pains, heart palpitations, da, da, da. It's like, nothing's wrong with you. You're fine. But it's this idea that you've convinced yourself to think that a pill is going to make you better. It's not. It's the opposite. It's not going to make you better at all. And so the question I would have for all of you is, are we looking at mental health as this Band-Aid approach? When the ancients, ancient Greece, ancient Egypt, ancient India, the ancients, to me, from what I've been able to gather and read, they seem to have gotten a better handle on mental health for their population. They were able to say, hey, man, listen, if you incorporate, the ancient Greeks talked about physical activity. They talked about taking care of your body, going for like physically strenuous activities. Ancient India said, Hindus, as long as time immemorial, have said, meditate every day. Think of it like, for those of you who have trained for marathons, know that you run 4 or 5 times a week, and every run is not the best. Sometimes you're slower, sometimes you don't feel like it, but it's the small incremental things you do every day. It's like compound interest. And the ancient Indians knew about that. That's why they said meditate every day. But one thing that I found was there was this idea that a pill could solve it. And I think we're looking at it in the wrong way. We're looking at it in a very different way. So anyways, all that to say, similar to Mark's point, Mark's in a situation where he has a disability and the doctors have said that he should be depressed, and he's not depressed. He's not. Mark, I don't know if you're still on the live stream, but he mentioned that, he was prescribed things, I believe, and he hasn't taken them because he's not depressed. And I wonder, is that a choice we're making? Is it a choice we're making every day? Or is there like, I have read this book, Diamond's book, about depression and the grips of depression. But is there a choice you can make even in those moments, those episodes, to choose a better mental health, well-being outlook on your day? Let me know what you think in the comments below. Let me know what you think about your own experiences with mental health and well-being as well. I'd love to know. So you might be asking, Christopher, why are you getting so deep? Why are you talking about all of this? And folks, this all ties into my blog that will be released Monday on alarmism, but also ties back into something. I just had my my blog structure up because I want to share with you all that what I see as the linkage between this heightened anxiety, this heightened stress, this heightened sense of mental illness, this heightened sense that if I take this pill, my issues will be solved, is in fact what Elon Musk and Barack Obama both did this week. They both, are trying to convince us that, Donald Trump is the best or Kamala Harris is the best. And this alarmism is used as a control mechanism, just as, getting Xanax or getting Ativan is used, pharmaceutical intervention is used as a control mechanism to get you hooked on these methamphetamines because you are mentally ill, right? I mean, that's basically what many doctors are saying. You are mentally ill, you need this, and we're going to get you hooked on this. And the same can be said for what Musk said about Trump. Remember, Musk said this is the last election if we don't register and vote, the alarmism, and it's used as a control mechanism. Musk is basically saying vote, register to vote, but only vote for Republicans. And the same is true with what Obama said yesterday in Pennsylvania when he was faced with young black men who are voting Republican in large numbers. And he was very paternalistic in his approach, saying that these young black men need, when he even said, when you're at the barbershop, you know, he actually said that when you're at the barbershop, when you're at church talking to young men, it's because they can't stand seeing a woman as president. And I just find that this is crazy. I think this is pretty wild that, Obama would say that, but it's used as a form of social control. This idea that young black men need to be fixed, their political ideology needs to be fixed because there's something fundamentally wrong with them if they're voting Republican. And this, in fact, is the fear-driven behavior, which mirrors that myth of illness, mental illness that Zaz talks about, where problems are overinflated, are over-dramatized, and we're not reminding ourselves that we do have a choice. We have a choice in the matter in front of us. And so I'd love to know what you think about that. I'd love to know what you think about Obama and Musk ringing the alarm bells on too much Democrats voting, too much Republicans voting, not enough Trump supporters, not enough Kamala Harris supporters. Obama openly was asked about the lack of people, the lack of engagement that he's seen at Kamala Harris rallies. He doesn't see as many people as engaged at Kamala Harris rallies as he did when he was running for president. And that's alarming to him. He's very alarmed by the number of young black men voting for or, saying that they're Republican. Very, very concerned about that. And to me, that's alarmism. And that's not good. And that tells me that Obama, despite his best intentions, and Musk, despite his best intentions, they're both not in true favor of freedom, of what freedom is. Freedom is truly allowing the individual to choose to vote or not, right? That's the crux of the matter. Whether or not you vote or not is of no merit to someone who is a true champion of freedom. If you choose to vote or not, that is your choice. And that is exactly what, the ancients talked about, the freedom of choice. And this is what Zaz is talking about, I think, in the myth of mental illness. You do have that freedom to choose, and it parallels Viktor Frankl's work in Man's Search for Meaning. People have the choice, even in the most destitute states where you're in a concentration camp and, there's death all around you. You're seeing your friends die. You're seeing your family die. You're seeing children die, gassed. And I think that's why Frankl's book resonates, because he was in a situation where he could have easily perished at any moment. And he chose, by his own free will, a different attitude. Him and a friend, I think. And there's a lot of stories in Man's Search for Meaning, which I find very powerful. So if you haven't read that book, that's a great read. B. Lloyd says, Black Americans who vote Republican are voting for their own demise. And I think B. Lloyd 167 has basically summarized Obama's view. Black Americans who vote Republican are voting for their own demise. And that's precisely what Obama said. Now, Lloyd167, I'll push back on you and say I don't think that you're a champion of freedom, and that's fine. That's okay. It's okay not to be a champion of freedom. But Black Americans, like every other American, has every right to vote however they like, and or not vote however they don't want to. But to suggest that they are if they're voting a certain way, they're voting for their own demise, not only makes you not a champion of freedom, you're actively telling people not to vote in a certain way. What does that remind us of? That reminds us of a state control message, alarmism, right? It's just how we structure it, how we frame it, how we look at it, right? You don't need a totalitarian state to talk about state control. All you need are comments like Black Americans who vote Republican are voting for their own demise. That comment is totalitarian, just not in that true form. It's saying vote and vote in a very specific way. We're not championing freedom. Freedom is something that terrifies us. As it should, I think. Freedom should terrify us because people can make some pretty bad choices, and we all have to be okay with that. Jay Ramesh says, thanks, Warren, for the 100% there. Jay Ramesh says, what makes voting unique is that it's one of the few freedoms that affects others' freedoms. I'll repeat that for everyone. Jay Ramesh says, what makes voting unique is that it is one of the few freedoms that affects other freedoms. Now, Jay Ramesh, I'm going to push back on you as well on that, because I would argue, going back to my blog, if you haven't already subscribed to my blog, openminds.substack.com, that alarmism is in fact a social control mechanism. And so if we say that voting affects other people's freedoms, that is a form of alarmism, because whether we'd like to believe this or not, there's also voting and not voting. Not voting, some would argue, is perhaps worse than voting. I'm going to pause there and see what people think. Not voting is worse than voting. So if not voting is a threat, should we mandate voting? Right? Because if people are not voting, then we're going to be left with choices that are not really good. Like Trump and Harris. But if people are voting, maybe there'd be better choices, more informed electorates, more nuanced leaders. I don't know, but the not voting is a freedom, and that is something, again, we wrestle with here in the West, because many people I talk to say that voting should be mandated as part of your citizenship duties. But if we are truly in the space of pursuing freedom, we have to be okay with people not voting. And in fact, the majority of people don't vote, which is a sad point for some. Okay, I'm going to pause there. I know I've been pontificating, which I hate. Lloyd167 says, Black Americans have never known freedom in America, especially in Republican states. Again, Lloyd167, I disagree. Because I think your statements are, they're your statements, but the characterization, Black Americans have never known freedom in America. First of all, I don't agree with that. But especially in Republican states, I don't agree with that either. Mark G says, I don't understand why they talk about the, quote, Black voter. Treat them like Americans. Totally, Mark. I think the reason why they say Black voter is because African Americans in the United States vote as a bloc almost exclusively for Democrats. And that's unlike, I think, anywhere else in the world where a minority group votes almost unanimously for one party. I believe Obama got 95% of the Black vote. Now, of course, Obama's Black, and that makes sense to some degree. To some degree, not a full degree, but to some degree. Because I would like to think people aren't voting on the basis of race, gender, ethnicity, etc. But the first Black president, given the history of the United States, I understand why many black men and women chose Obama over John McCain. That makes sense. And he was a Democrat. But if you look at like Bill Clinton, many people say Bill Clinton was the first black president. Joe Biden, I think, got 87% or 85% of the black vote. So I think that's why, Mark, people say they talk about the black voter, because if the black voter is changing to Republican, which they're seeing now with young black men, that's actually a reality. And also, I think many Democrats are quite arrogant about the black vote, saying like, "Oh, we've got this lock, stock, and barrel. We don't need to worry." And I think that's, I don't think that's a good strategy either. But interesting, anyways, nonetheless. Um, Warren says, "Please elaborate." 100%, I agree with that. Let me just make sure. Uh, Mark G says, "People did vote for Trump. They just didn't vote for Harris." Yeah, that's a good point. Actually, they didn't vote for Harris. Jay Ramesh says, um, Jay Ramesh says, "I think you're being too far too liberal with my usage of alarmism. I do think there are good." Oh, your comment got cut off again, Jay Ramesh. Mark G says, "I ran out of words, so thank you for finishing my point." Thanks, Mark G. B. Lloyd says, "There's not one right and freedom you enjoy in America. Oh, I see. Um, B. Lloyd says, "There's not one right and freedom that you enjoy in America that Republicans have not fought against." Have you ever been to Mississippi? Are you going to deny the existence of sundown towns in the South? So, B. Lloyd, I think this is a, a classic example of, taking uh, perspectives to the extreme and then validating your point with extreme policies, examples, etc. When you say things like there's not one right and freedom you enjoy in America that Republicans have not fought against, that's like a vapid statement. Um, Republicans and Democrats, by and large, have fought for and against freedoms at various times in history based on a series of circumstances in that historical context. If there were additional airport security measures enacted tomorrow with no, terrorism, etc., activity happening, many people would be up in arms because nothing's happening. But it doesn't mean that liberals and conservatives, Republicans and Democrats during, in and around 9/11 were actually arguing for more, more ID, more biometrics, etc., more tool usage of tracking people in airports that people generally were okay with at the time. So to say that Republicans are fighting against freedoms all the time, I don't know. It's just too extreme. Um, Warren says, "Why do you think Dems want Harris as their leader? Woman and black, that's their selling point." B. Lloyd says, "Why do Republicans suppress the black vote?" Okay, let's go back to Warren's point, or comment. Why do you think Democrats want Harris as their leader? She's a woman and she's black. That's their selling point. The bigger question, so sadly, Warren, this is an age of like vapid um politics where we're looking at things like that, but I think beyond that I think is a sub point to a broader point which I've talked about here on the channel, which is she assumed Joe Biden's electorates. You have to remember, to become presidential candidate, you have to go state to state and make your case and get the electorates for the party to get behind you. She assumed Joe Biden's electorates. Now, some would say, well, of course, because Joe Biden stepped down in July and da da da. It's like, yeah, but the general public did not choose Kamala Harris as the leader of the Democratic Party. The Democrats did, not the electorate. And there's something to be said about that. Delegates are earned, they're not given. If anyone recalls, 2008, up until the Iowa primary, I would argue, it was pretty much lock, stock, and barrel. Oops, give me a second, folks. That that Hillary Clinton was going to get the nomination for the Dems. And it was Obama that came back and really surprised people. So remember, Kamala Harris was given delegates. That is scary from a Federalist perspective. Alexander Hamilton, John Edison, they all wrote about this. They all said factionalism is a real threat to American democracy. And Kamala Harris basically is that. If you notice, I notice she does not really criticize Biden's record as much because I think she knows she's dancing on thin ice with this whole delegate thing, which nobody wants to talk about, and we should be talking about because I think that's a big issue. And I'm seeing that this is So Jay Ramesh says 87% of Democrats were in favor of her replacing Joe Biden. Again, we can that could be right, Jay Ramesh, but at the end of the day, you have to make your case to the public. You can't make your case inside the party. If that were the case, I'm sure if it were up to Democrats in 2008, Hillary Clinton would have been chosen over Barack Obama. That's my honest opinion. I think honestly, like they would have been like, yeah, Hillary's the person, not Barack Obama. He's not, the person in that place. So you can't let the party make those decisions. You have to let the people make the decisions, and the people didn't make the decision for Kamala Harris. But anyways, that's besides the point. Folks, I've kind of gone on a rant here, and I feel like I'm running out now. So I'm just gonna kind of start slowing down and maybe start ending the live stream. But folks, I wanted to just say, first of all, thank you again for tuning in, for subscribing. Remember, definitely subscribe to me on TikTok. I'm trying to hit 1,000. A million would be great. 1,000 would be great. So if you haven't already, subscribe to me on TikTok at my full name, Christopher Balkaran, Balkaran. And definitely subscribe to me. Subscribe to my weekly blog, Curious Mondays, Substack.com. Mark G, phone's dying. Love the respectful conversations. Mark, there's going to be a lot more of this, man. Thank you so much for joining. And thank you all for entertaining me after I've finished reading Thomas Zaz. I'm going to keep on this because these are very important topics. And tomorrow's Thanksgiving here in Canada. And great chats as always. And B. Lloyd, I don't agree with basically any of your comments, but I invite you back, like I've done with Nemnock, who I think is on this call as well. Nemnock, B. Lloyd, love to have you back. I don't agree with your perspectives, but I love the fact that you're engaging in this respectful dialogue, just as long as we keep it respectful. That's it for me, folks. Go ahead, click that like button, definitely subscribe, and I will catch you all here again. If not tonight, later than tomorrow for sure. Happy Thanksgiving to those in Canada who celebrate, and we will catch each other next. And that is it. I'm still seeing some comments as they come in, but thanks again, everyone. I've got to end this. I've got to get something. My throat's dry. All right. Take care, everyone. Have a great rest of your day. Take care.